Hey guys, this is the Interim Expert Team. I'm Parker. We're here with Kana, Elisa, and today we're interviewing Preston James, and I will go ahead and let him speak to a little bit about DivInc and what he's doing.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Really excited to be here. So really quickly, DivInc is a early stage startup accelerator focused on serving underrepresented startup founders here in Austin. I've been operating for 4 years. The accelerator is a 3-month intense program. And so since 2016, we've helped over, I think it's 65 companies launch or accelerate here in Texas. Well over 80 founders have participated in the program. In addition to that, we actually have an alumni program where we continue to support the participants those who participate in the accelerator program. We continue to support them over the next 12 to 18 months. So, and then, we have other entrepreneurship programs as well. We have an initiative focused on women of color, startup founders. It's called Startup Sisters. So last year or this past year, we served well over 300 women of color startup founders through that initiative. We're looking to continue to grow that because women of color, specifically Black women and Latinas, are the fastest growing demographic for entrepreneurs, but also the most underfunded. So we've got to change that dynamic and really empower the sisters to do better. And then, most recently, we announced that we're expanding into Houston. So starting in January 2021, we'll also be running our accelerator, our alumni, our Startup Sisters programming in Houston as well. So basically, in 1 year's time, double the number of founders and that we're helping to launch and accelerate through our program. And then lastly, it's really about how do we change the dynamics in the industry, make it a more authentically inclusive, not just because a better thing to do, but it's the right thing to do from business perspective, the economy, from the racial wealth gap, addressing the racial wealth gap in our society. It's about doing right by our society and really empowering of our population to rise up and have equal opportunity. So we're excited about what we're doing. Looking forward to Houston, continuing with Austin, and then also we'll talk more about this, but how do we address the issue of getting better access to financial capital for the underrepresented founders. So I'm going to stop there. Really excited to be with this group and talk more about what we're doing.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us, Preston. This is really fantastic. So,
yes. My first question that I'll throw at you is, and I know this is kind of loaded, right? Because there's a lot of hurdles that we've all faced in the last year. But if you could pick out maybe the biggest challenge or several biggest challenges that 2020 threw your way for DivInc, what would you feel like those are?
We're a nonprofit. We're sort of an early stage nonprofit startup, right? So when COVID hit, most of our income is coming from corporate partners and also foundations and grants. So initially for us, it was like, okay, what the heck is going to happen to our revenue stream? Like, will corporations bail out? Will everybody kind of shut down? And so for the first 2 months or so, 2 or 3 months, things were pretty locked down. And, and then also from the programming standpoint, it's like, how do we go execute our programming? Because it was all face-to-face, community engagement. So very quickly, both, I think our funding revenue stream. We had to figure that out. And then also, how do we pivot, our programming to take it, virtual. And the funny thing was COVID, the lockdown in COVID, I think happened, March 13th or something like that. Our cohort accelerated program was supposed to start April 1st. So essentially we had 3 weeks to flip the program from in-person to virtual. And we did that very, very successfully. And so we just took that playbook and then executed again in the fall. So those were the two biggest things. The third thing that I would add was that when the next layer of George Floyd's murder happened, that was problematic too, right? Because now you have this emotion, stirring up in the community. As a Black man in society, it was painful for me, and I felt the need to really try to do something to help make, to address these disparities and injustices. And so we took a chance and did even another sort of pivot from the traditional accelerator program, and we created what we call the Social Justice Innovation Accelerator Program, with the hopes that we can, address the disparities in society by leveraging both innovation and activism. And so how do we bring those two together to address those disparities and those injustices caused by racism, right? And then how do we accelerate the adoption of those, innovative solutions into our community? And so that was another, sort of pivot point for us that we did not anticipate, but felt like it was an opportunity or something we needed from a leadership in the community to be able to address, some of those issues. So those are the three things, and it was hard, but we came through it, and I'm proud to say, without my team, we would not be in a positive position, with positive momentum that we have now, where we're still growing throughout even through the pandemic.
Amazing. Honestly,
So,
go ahead.
So I think a really important question to ask for both you as an organization, but also the companies that you're helping to support, what have you seen in terms of fundraising? Has the environment changed? Have people pulled back? And if you could specifically comment on the social justice accelerator program, that would be great to see how funders are feeling about it.
Sure. So the fundraising has been really interesting in that traditional investors, venture capital, angels, I think, have been somewhat alerted. And for those that really care, I think they're leaning in on how to effectively make capital available to underrepresented founders. It's still hard. It's still hard as hell, but I think there's a push that's happening. I think that there's been a significant amount of leadership that has come from major corporations that have announced major initiatives. SoftBank and Bank of America and JP Morgan and others have come in like hardcore billion-dollar type commitments, PayPal, Microsoft, others. And so they're leaning in. I think they really stepped up their leadership in trying to make capital available either directly to founders or to organizations that support these underrepresented founders. So, and then there's also fund of funds that, I think we've seen more venture capital firms being stood up by, Black and Latinx leaders and funders. So some of those are being stood up. Some of those funds are getting more capital. So I think there's more capital coming in. What I had, conversation is that now that capital is being made available, how do we get it invested, right? And I think that's where we're sort of waiting to see how that works out, right? It's like, is it being invested? Is there going to be an increase? When I say increase, it has to be an increase relative to the overall number, right? So we can go from 1 million to 5 million, but if the industry goes from 100 million to 500 million, we're still getting a smaller share of everything. So I think that's, listen to your question, it's a great question, is, are we going to get a greater share than what we've had, right? In the past for, Black and Latinx, we're getting like 1% of venture capital, right? Will that needle move from 1% to 5% come 2022? I hope so. Women were at 2-3%. Will we see women at 10-11% of all venture capital? That's what needs to happen, right? And so I don't have that specific answer, but it seems like the tide has moved. It's moving in the right direction. We just got to make sure the deployment actually happens and deliver the value behind that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say there are a lot of grants becoming available too. So we've seen a lot of small grant opportunities. Hello Alice did a great job. They deployed a lot of capital. Eureka, in partnership, I think Sales.com, they did some things as well. Bank of America. I mean, but again, relative to what's available, is it going to be a good enough amount? In that, okay, here's a sort of a charity investment. Not interested. Not interested in charity investment. We're talking about business investment to create jobs, to create, to close the gap in generational wealth, things of that nature. Let's move the needle for real.
I love that. Absolutely. It's interesting because I feel like there's so many offshoot questions from this and from what you just kind of touched on right there. It's, what do you feel like are the steps that will need to happen in order for that needle to actually move for real? I know that there are a lot of people putting minorities and women in top positions at companies, and they're getting a lot more pressure to do that. But what else do you feel like is a big step that will kind of keep that momentum going?
I think, we've got to continue with these collaborations that are so important, right? Because I think if we develop these collaborations where we're actually working to solve these problems together and not in these silos, and build, the trust and relationships and, and then also help and support, right? So, give a great example, right? If DivInc and let's just say, JP Morgan, partner together, we may not solve everything today, right? And if there's an initial investment, okay, we've accomplished this in year 1. In year 2, here's how we can do it better, maybe with even more investment, right? And same thing with the fund, with the fund of funds. There's capital to be deployed, but let's collaborate to figure out what's the best way to do that, right? No one organization is going to be able to solve that. And so I think we build these collaborations and work together to really address issues at the core, right? In order to remove and lower these barriers, we've got to be able to go to the core of where these issues are. And when we address those and then, create the right programming and everything else to grow, I think will do wonders, right? It'll be like, oh my God, this is, why didn't we do this 10 years ago, right? These collaborations also open up our networks because, Alyssa knows this, the VC network is relatively, it's large, but it's small, right? It's very homogeneous, et cetera, right? They need to open up their world, underrepresented founders need to open up their world, and together, we can do this, like, oh my God, like, oh, I didn't know about this, that, and the other. Opportunities just open up. And that's part of the diversity and inclusion aspect, is like, we thrive, right? Companies thrive when all of these different ideas and perspectives come to the table. And it's no different than in the startup ecosystem. And I think some of that is starting to happen. So that's what I think that needs to happen. Continue with the capital, but deploying the capital way in the right places requires that collaboration.
Absolutely. I feel like you see a lot right now where people are like you said, donating money, right? Where companies are saying, I'm going to give this to this cause, but there's not as many thinking about like, what can I invest this in to make this grow and actually invest in the community. And it seems like that's what y'all are doing at DivInc.
Exactly. I mean, I think these are some really great, I've had so many conversations with folks since COVID and George Floyd. And then this is a funny thing, and I think Alyssa will appreciate this. Post, COVID, George Floyd combination, how many advisory boards was I invited to? Leadership forums and advisory boards. I was just so overwhelmed. It was probably like 9 or 10, can you be part of this discussion? Can you be part of that? And, crazy me, I didn't say no because I understood what people were trying to do, right? They were trying to get different insights and perspectives and better ways of doing things. So I was sort of like the low-hanging fruit for them. Call Preston, But I think, when folks are tuning in that way and they want to know what and how and better understand things, that your ears are open, your minds are open, your hearts are open. You gotta dig in there. You gotta get in and see if you can make a change and show people a different perspective, offer some solutions. And so, I think a lot of that has been going on. Obviously, I'm not the only one, right? But that's what needs to continue to happen. And I'm going to make myself available whenever I feel like I can lend my voice, lend my experiences and perspectives to do better for our community. I'm going to do it. So,
yeah. Do you feel like that there was maybe a tool or a piece of information that would have been really useful for you in light of COVID specifically, to have either known, before 2020, or to have either had in your toolkit before COVID hit?
I'm sure there are. I read through the, thought about that question. I'm just like, yeah, I guess there's a whole lot of stuff. I would love to have one of those I can walk into, you can spray me down and COVID is gone, right? I would love to have one of those.
Yeah.
But, I think, and I have to be careful when I say this, this has forced a lot of people to grow, right? It's forced this country to grow, even though it's ugly. We've lost so many lives. Politics are damning right now. The division is, it's sad. The country is growing in a lot of different ways, good, bad, or indifferent. And I guess for me, it's just a growth opportunity. I'm sure there were things like, how do how could you have prepared for the mental stress of lockdown?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, how could we have avoided, you know, some of this, you know, divisiveness that's happening over something that's doesn't, you know, it doesn't even make any sense. It's a pandemic. It's not a political discussion, you know. You know, so if I had a, you know, toolkit or something, I'd be like, hey, you know, pandemic is a, you know, it's a human thing, and politics is over here, right? That has nothing to do with this, right? Because that's basically why we're still in this damn pandemic, is because we politicized the whole damn thing. So that's not a toolkit, but you know, it's a growth. I think it's a growth period, and my guess is a lot of us will come out, you know, better, stronger, smarter, and you know, ready for the next time this happens, which could be in 5 years, you know, 3 years. Some of us will be weakened, but hopefully those who have got stronger will help who were weakened. That's the hope.
I really appreciate you kind of bringing up the mental aspect of this year in entirety, because I think that's, you know, you can talk industry specifics all day, but truly there is a huge change in the mentality of people, and be it for better or worse, right? A lot of people are going through things, and I think it's really important that in, you know, our work that we do acknowledge that. So
yeah, it's funny to me, right? I'm a father of 4 children, and you know, it's great, it's wonderful. But I can tell you, we were ripping and running, right? You know, work, activities, pick up this one, drop that one, come back home. So, you know, for a while, this was quite pleasant. I'm like, okay, we don't have nowhere to go this weekend, right? And then there's this rush to get back to normalcy. And I'm like, we really want to get back into that rat race, you know, or can we reset and get somewhere in between, you know? And I thought about it. I was like, no, can't get anywhere in between. It's got to be this one, because you know, that's just the nature of how we operate. And people are so anxious to get back into normalcy, maybe to try to save their sanity, right? Maybe because they feel like if they're in the rat race, they're in a better place mentally. I don't know. But with 4 children, I can see each and every one of them dealing with COVID and George Floyd and all different matters, and that creates mental stress for me. Right, I'm not even really COVID. It hasn't really affected me. But what has affected me is how my children and my family are handling it. That's what's really draining on me. Not in a bad way, but I mean, as a father, right? You care, you want to make sure they're okay coming out of this, and they're young, right? So everything they see, they hear, they experience, they're taking it in a different way than I am, you know. And then, you know, of course, with workers and frontline and people volunteering, it's hard. It's really, really hard, right? So it's big time. The mental health piece is big time.
yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Do you guys have any other questions?
So many. But Elisa, if you want to go first, you can, if you have something else.
I'm wondering, like, if we can kind of dig into that mental health piece a little bit more, like, especially talking about the founders that you work with, because everyone knows being a founder is really hard and it can be really lonely. What have you seen that founders have done since we've kind of been put in this nice little Zoom box over the last 10 months to be able to maintain their mental health?
Yeah, you know, the founders have had to. So one thing that we did as DivInc, we already started it, was to get founders together, sort of like as a founders CEO forum, right? So they can, for that purpose of it's lonely, it's hard, I need a shoulder to cry on. I need somebody to bounce some ideas off. So they're talking and being with each other. And then they can just kick it, right? They don't have to talk about business. They can just kick it. We had to do that more. So we had to be very intentional with every founder to make sure they were, plugged in some way, whether it was a small group, bigger group, but making sure everybody was plugging in with, somebody else. They had somebody to talk to, whether it was a group setting, one-on-one. So we had to do more. I think we had to do more of those check-ins and make sure, folks were okay. I think that was the big thing for us, and create a setting where they can just let it out, right? Whether it was family, they had issues with family, with business, with themselves or whatever. We just created a environment and culture, which is part of what we do at DivInc. It's just be, right? Just be. We don't have to talk about business. What's going on with you, right? Oh, my aunt, has COVID, and I gotta take care of my niece, and things like that. But I'm gonna tell you, a lot of the underrepresented founders, they're carrying quite a bit of a load, as already, and then you throw starting a company on top of that, and when you start having these conversations about the load that they're carrying, it's like, damn, we've got to provide some additional support. And, this situation was absolutely put a spotlight on that. So we just had to do more reaching out, more touching. Couldn't do the hugs, but, that was the tough part. No more hugs, but a lot of talking, a lot of talking and reaching out.
I love that. One thing that really hit a chord with me in particular was something that you kind of touched on in a couple questions back, where you mentioned that there are a lot of people who are eager to get back to the way things were and go back to normalcy, right? But I think that's an extremely toxic mentality, because things are broken, right? Like the reason, not the reason the reason a fair amount of businesses didn't survive is because they were broken in the first place, and they were on their way out. The reason that there is attention being brought to the lack of diversity in companies is because it was broken, right? Like something that needs to be fixed. There are so many statistics out there showing how companies are much more profitable with a more diverse team. They have higher margins. It just makes more sense because you have more points of view put into place. So what's one thing that you feel like everyone, if you could just pick one thing that people had to pick to keep as a change moving forward, what would that be? That's come out of all.
Okay, one thing that what? I'm sorry.
One mentality, like one change that's happened in COVID. What's one mentality that you feel like we should hold on to, that we have to hold on to in order to keep change moving forward?
I think one thing to do, and I think you kind of hit on this already, is that I think you need to bring, you're in a crisis mode, right? And you've got to bring, those voices and perspectives to the table, right? And sort through those, because, how are we going to grow? How are we going to change? What can we do to move to this next phase, right? How do we, and I think the companies that did that well, because here's the thing, ultimately, your company is going to be as good as your people. So if your people are no good, the company ain't going nowhere, right? And so I saw this, I heard about this, large companies startups, mid-sized companies, where whenever I think companies brought their people together and allow people to have a voice about whether it was sort of at the personal side or the business side and ideas and what we can do, you need all of that to come in. Yes, you need to sort through it, but you need all of that. You need everybody leaning in to get the best ideas to not only serve your customers, but how do you serve your employees? Right? How do you serve, how do you serve your partners? How do you serve your, your vendors or whatever it may be? So allowing people to lean in, bringing that creativity, that innovation from these different, to me, that is just totally key. Must do that. I mean, you absolutely must. Be it the board, employees, partners, bring them in, get the wheels spinning, come up with some initiatives and go. Right? If you don't do it and you do it in silo, you get lucky. But I say if you bring the voices and perspectives together, you more than likely are going to come up with something great.
Is there a particular practice that y'all have at DivInc where y'all kind of have that? Is there some sort of like a weekly meeting or just sort of practice that y'all are able to?
Yeah, it was both, weekly meeting, and then also the board. Our board of directors chimed in, pretty heavy. It was like, okay, time out. Where are we? What do we need to do? Tell us what you need. How we need to do it. How can we help? And then the team leaned in as well. Our partners. We had some really great partners who said, we reached out to them. Some of them reached out to us, and they were like, where are you? How can we help? And I think by doing all of that, we put in a, game plan where we said, okay, we're going to dig in and we're going to go. And if we can execute, we'll be in a good place. If not, we'll be closing up shop, in 3 months. I mean, literally the board meeting after COVID hit, I walked in and I said, we have about 3 months. We're good for about 3 months. If you don't raise a dime for the next 3 months, we can do 3 months. After that, if you don't raise a dime, we're closing up shop. Right? And everybody was like, okay, got it. That was loud and clear, but they didn't bail out. They leaned in and they stepped up, and now we're in a position where, we're in a position that I think many organizations would like to be in. And we're expanding to Houston, right? Which is like, you're expanding now as a nonprofit. That's, like, yep. We're doing it carefully, but we're doing it. And part of our message is, and I was thinking about this morning in talking to underrepresented founders, my message to them is, me as a CEO of DivInc, as founder of DivInc, I am them. I represent the underrepresented founders. I'm doing what they want to do, right? To a certain, see me, see yourself, right? It can be done, and so let's go.
I love that.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Preston. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Before we go, I just want to make sure, is there anything else that you would like to kind of like bring up about your upcoming events? I know you have your Champions of Change Awards event on March 4th, and then your expansion announcement in January. Is there anything else people should know about DivInc or ways that they should get involved? Maybe a call to action.
Yeah, we got one other thing, depending on who your audience is we are in the process of establishing a fund for underrepresented founders. So we'll be looking for folks who want to invest in underrepresented founders and are interested in plugging into that. So that's sort of like the third thing going on. So we have Houston expansion, Champions of Change. Applications are opening in, next week for the next accelerator, but the fund is going to be a critical component as well. So we're excited about that. So I think it'll be end of first quarter where that fund will be open. And so we'll be looking for investors to come on in.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like you guys are really kind of taming the change and making something happen. So we're excited to see where you go with it.
That's what we're trying to do. Can't be still. We got to be making it happen.
Oh, hell yeah. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Great to see you.
All right, appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Preston.
Bye-bye.
Bye.